Powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Imran Khan is a worried man. He started off as a crusader against French President Emmanuel Macron, but his campaign against France's crackdown on radical Islam backfired, so much so that Imran Khan has been forced to bow down to Islamists. But in Pakistan, extremists have been systematically mainstreamed, time and again. On Gravitas tonight, we are focusing on Imran Khan's many problems at home and his misplaced priorities. With the Pakistan government bowing down to extremists and giving in to their demands, it is falling deep inside a self-created trap. And the people of Pakistan are paying the price. We decode what it means for the people when hardliners are allowed to take over the driver's seat and steer the country towards chaos. I'm Molly Gambhir, also on the show tonight. After declaring Europe to be an enemy of Islam, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has a sudden change of heart. We tell you why in a special report about Erdogan's newfound love for Europe. Did Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Saudi Crown Prince MBS meet? We tell you what's cooking and what lies ahead for the Abraham Accord. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine candidate announces its efficacy. How does it work? How much does it cost? And when can you access it? That's coming up on our vaccine tracker tonight. Is tech giant Apple supporting human rights violations in China? A new report says the tech giant is lobbying against a bill to prevent forced labor in China. After cargo handlers were linked to a COVID-19 outbreak in Shanghai, authorities asked all cargo staff to take Wuhan virus tests. The result was a mess. And Interpol now says world leaders need to be wary of COVID-infected letters. We tell you all about the threat of deliberate transmission. But first, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
Cash-strapped Pakistan has secured $800 million worth of debt-freeze deals from 14 members of the G20, while it was still awaiting ratification by the remaining 6 countries of the grouping, including Saudi Arabia and Japan. 2 people have been killed and several others suffered life-threatening injuries in a stabbing attack at a church near San Jose in California. There were no services going on at the church at the time of the incident, but people without homes had been brought into the church to get them out of the cold. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised that England's coronavirus lockdown will end on December 2nd, but said that local restrictions will remain. The country's finance minister Rishi Sunak has said that Christmas is not going to be normal this year. Hong Kong's pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong is detained after pleading guilty to charges of organizing and enticing an unauthorized assembly near the police headquarters during last year's anti-government protests. Wong faces a maximum 5-year jail term. The sentence will be delivered on December 2nd. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has given forces in Tigray a 72-hour ultimatum to surrender before the military begins an offensive on the rebel-held regional capital of Mekelle. This as the Ethiopian army threatened to besiege the city of 500,000, warning civilians to flee. According to reports, India will host the G20 summit in 2023 and not in 2022, with a postponement of 1 year. This will be the first such summit of the grouping in India since its formation after the 2008 financial crisis. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who governed France from 2007 till 2012, goes on trial over corruption charges. Sarkozy is accused of trying to bribe a judge and of influence peddling. After a lengthy safety review, Europe's aviation safety regulator, or EASA, has said that the Boeing 737 MAX is safe to fly after changes to the design of the jet that crashed twice in 5 months in 2018 and 2019, killing 346 people. The EASA expects to clear the aircraft for commercial flights in January 2021. Russia's Daniil Medvedev has been crowned champions of the ATP Tour Finals after beating world number 3 Dominic Thiem. The fourth seed was in trouble after losing the first set and going down 2-0 in the second set tiebreak, but he rallied to win 4-6, 7-6, 6-4 and grab the biggest title of his career. 24-year-old Medvedev is the first player ever to beat each of the world's top 3 ranked players at the year-end championships. Liverpool have moved up to second in the Premier League standings after a clinical 3-0 win over Leicester City. Despite being without several key players, the Reds dominated the match, and an own goal from Johnny Evans, followed by strikes from Diogo Jota and Roberto Firmino, helped them extend their unbeaten streak at Anfield to a club record 64 league games. Liverpool are level on points, with Tottenham at the top of the table, but trailing on goal difference.
Poverty, inflation, job loss, the Wuhan virus, a potential economic collapse. These are just some issues that the people of Pakistan are extremely worried about. But the Imran Khan government should be paying its attention to these issues. But what's happening on the ground is a completely different story. The radicals have hijacked Pakistan's political agenda. Take a look at this. Crowds as far as the eye can see. These pictures are of a funeral that happened this weekend. These people are supporters of a radical cleric, Khadim Hussain Rizvi, the man who led the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, who just a few days before his death brought the entire Pakistani government to its knees by blocking the streets and holding Islamabad hostage over his demand that Pakistan should cut all ties to France. Khadim Hussain Rizvi died last week. Tens of thousands of supporters gathered for his funeral in Lahore. No masks, no social distancing. In April, when Pakistan imposed lockdown measures, the Imran Khan government had issued specific orders for religious clerics. It had asked the army to step in if the lockdown measures were violated and if the clerics crossed the line. Well, the army was nowhere to be seen on Saturday. There was no one stopping the hardliners as they showed utter disregard for the rules. A second and more lethal wave of the virus is currently engulfing Pakistan. The Pakistani government has banned big events and meetings. Allegedly, it is not allowing the opposition to hold rallies over the risk of the spread of infection. But the same Imran Khan government cannot stop the clerics because the administration is helpless. So just how many people were there? Some claims say tens of thousands. A report estimated a figure close to 200,000. There were so many people there that Rizvi's coffin could not be carried through the crowd. They were taking it to the funeral site, but they had to stop on a bridge just because of the sheer number of people that had turned up. That is the influence that hardliners have over Pakistan. Khadim Hussain Rizvi was a Sunni Barelvi cleric, Before he gained the reputation of a firebrand and controversial politician, Rizvi used to work in Pakistan's Ministry of Religious Affairs. He left that job and launched his party in 2015, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, that has brought the Imran Khan government to its knees on more occasions than one. Rizvi built his name over another man, Mumtaz Qadri, a guard who killed Salman Taseer, the governor of Punjab, who wanted to reform the blasphemy laws of the country. So in the eyes of the Pakistani state, Qadri was a convicted killer. But for Rizvi, he became a source of inspiration to galvanize the crowds. He called Mumtaz Qadri a hero and began a campaign making blasphemy the central issue. Rizvi and his supporters have held Pakistan hostage as many as 3 times. First, with the Faizabad sit-in against the Nawaz Sharif government in 2017. You may remember this. This was the same protest that ended with the Pakistani general distributing cash to the protesters. This is Major General Azhar Naveed Hayat. He was handing out envelopes containing 1,000 Pakistani rupee notes, a gift for the supporters of this radical. The Tehreek-e-Labbaik returned to the streets in 2018 when Asia Bibi was acquitted from the blasphemy charges. Rizvi and his supporters practically held the entire country hostage. The Pakistani government was forced to delay Asia Bibi's release. Asia Bibi and her family had to leave Pakistan because the hardliners had called for her death. Khadim Hussain Rizvi took to the streets for a third time. This was just a few days ago. More than 1,000 extremists besieged Pakistan's capital for 2 days over the French government's decision to fight radical Islam. The internet was shut down. Routes to Islamabad were closed because the hardliners were back. Rizvi managed to extract key concessions in exchange for ending the protests. This included the promise to evict the French ambassador from Pakistan. When in opposition, Imran Khan had supported the sit-ins by Rizvi and his supporters, and now the hardliners have taken over Pakistan. And how? They are dictating the policies of the Pakistani government, setting its agenda. And Imran Khan seems to be singing to their tunes. Khadim Rizvi is dead. But his death does not mean an end to extremism in Pakistan. Hardliners now have deep tentacles inside the country and its policies. They may have failed to make a dent in the last election, but these groups do have the power to influence the outcome. Our next report tells you more.
बात करें, हाँ जी, वो भी 295 सी पर ईसाइयों को बुलाकर भी 295 सी पर वो बात करें. बताओ ईसाइयों.
He was one of Pakistan's most controversial clerics. But within a year of creating his political party, Khadim Hussain Rizvi was a national figure. The massive support base allowed the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan to jump into the political fray. The party contested the 2018 election. They lost on all 566 contested seats. But it wasn't a complete disaster. The Tehreek-e-Labbaik did enough to harm the big players. It won 2.2 million votes, emerging as the 5th largest party by votes. On 13 seats, the hardliners got enough votes to ensure a loss for the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz. That's how a far-right party made space for itself in the mainstream politics of Pakistan. In 2018, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik won 3 seats in the Provisional Assembly of Sindh by projecting itself as the guardian of Prophet Muhammad's honor. Pakistan has more such self-appointed guardians, like Hafiz Saeed, the mastermind of the 26/11 terrorist attacks. When his party, the Milli Muslim League's registration was rejected, Pakistani authorities bent the rules. Hafiz Saeed was allowed to field candidates through a dormant political entity, the Allahu Akbar Tehreek. More than 260 candidates contested under this banner. They all lost. But a door was opened for Hafiz Saeed to enter Pakistan's mainstream politics. The same loopholes were used to field more hardliners, like the members of the Ahle Sunnat wal Jamaat, a banned anti-Shia sectarian organization. The group's head, Ahmad Ludhianvi, was given a license to participate. His assets were unfrozen, travel restrictions were removed. Just like Hafiz Saeed's candidates, the Ahle Sunnat wal Jamaat fielded its terrorists under a new platform, the Pakistan Rah-e-Haq Party. In the 2018 election, religious parties fielded more than 1,500 candidates in Pakistan, a major spike from just a few hundred in 2013. It is believed that the plan to mainstream hardliners was pushed by Pakistan's military. The army's alleged scheme of political engineering helped radicals gain political space, develop followers and create a dedicated vote bank. They don't have representatives in Pakistan's National Assembly yet, but the hardliners don't need a seat in the parliament to influence the decisions made in Islamabad. They are getting their way from the streets of Pakistan. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In 2018, Imran Khan promised a Naya Pakistan or a new Pakistan, one that will create 10 million jobs, build an Islamic welfare state, restore Pakistan's tattered image abroad. What happened to these promises when Imran Khan took office? He first gave in to the whims and fancies of the Pakistani military. He was then accused of being a puppet in the hands of the Chinese government. The promised Islamic welfare state was never built, but just when you thought things could not get any worse, the Imran Khan government decided to bow down to Pakistan's religious extremists. We have told you on this show how Imran Khan's proximity to the military and China backfired. For example, how China looted Pakistan of $630 million through projects linked to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, one that is now being called the power scam. On Gravitas tonight, we focus on how Imran Khan is letting invisible forces and religious hardliners take to the driver's seat and steer the country towards shutdowns, protests and chaos, and what this means for the people of Pakistan. Let's take a look at what happened just last week, when the Pakistan government bowed down to hardliners who had then taken to the streets against the French President Emmanuel Macron's crackdown on radical Islam. A deal was signed between the Pakistan government and the hardliners, forcing Islamabad to cut diplomatic ties with Paris. The Pakistani government promised to enact a legislation which would ultimately lead to the expulsion of the French ambassador. It agreed to not send an ambassador to France. And not just that, the Pakistan administration also promised to have French products boycotted at a government level. Do you think Pakistan can afford to snap ties with France? It is one of the most important members of the European Union. France is also one of Pakistan's most important trade partners. In fact, a 2016 study showed that Pakistan's imports from France amount to about 9% of its total EU imports, $0.37 billion of the total $6.92 billion. Given Pakistan's economic condition, can Imran Khan afford to mess this up? Pakistan also uses critical French military equipment, the likes of Mirage fighter aircraft, mine hunters, Augusta 90B submarines. Can you imagine what snapping of ties could mean for Pakistan? A religious extremist may not understand this, but the government should. Yet, the Imran Khan government chose to give in to the demands of Khadim Hussain Rizvi, Pakistan's Interior Minister Ejaz Shah, and Minister for Religious Affairs P. Nurul Qadri signed the agreement with Rizvi's party. What does all this tell us about Pakistan's priorities? Islamabad is busy deciding what to do with France when it has a growing list of troubles at home. For example, the intensifying COVID-19 crisis. In March this year, Pakistan's stock exchange recorded the biggest decline in 10 years. There is food inflation that's affecting the people of Pakistan on a daily basis, unemployment. And how can we forget terror financing? Let me give you some numbers now. According to the World Bank, Pakistan's real GDP growth is estimated to have declined from 1.9% in FY19 to minus 1.5% in FY20. Consumer inflation has risen from 6.8% in FY19 to an average of 10.7% in FY20. The Pakistan rupee has depreciated 13.8% against the US dollar in FY20. Pakistan's export values contracted 7.5%. Its external debt has grown to 38.2% of its GDP. And instead of addressing these crucial figures and issues, Imran Khan's government is busy letting fundamentalists set the country's agenda. There have been protests against France in other countries as well, be it Malaysia or Turkey. But where else have you seen a country's leader bowing down to these invisible forces? Where else have you seen a democratically elected party striking a deal with extremists on the country's foreign policies? By giving in to these demands of first the military, then China, and now the extremists, the government of Imran Khan is betraying those who voted for them and placing their interests in the back seat. He stoked the rage of extremists. He acted as an apologist for terror. He justified violence in the name of religion. And he declared Europe to be an enemy of Islam. Recep Tayyip Erdogan unleashed a deluge of hatred and bigotry against European leaders for cracking down on political Islam. In recent weeks, his speeches have almost always included violent metaphors or vilifying rhetoric against Europe. But all of a sudden, it seems the Turkish leader has had a change of heart. Erdogan is now insisting that Turkey is a part of Europe. In the next 4 minutes, we decode his hypocrisy and tell you what led to this U-turn. Starting with what Erdogan has said. Two very significant statements. One, we don't see ourselves elsewhere but in Europe. And two, we envisage building our future together with Europe. These are the Turkish president's words. He said this in a recent speech to members of his party. His statement came with a caveat. Erdogan said this does not mean Turkey will bow down to quote-unquote veiled injustices. But for most part, he struck a conciliatory tone. I'm quoting again, we do not believe that we have any problems with countries or institutions that cannot be solved through politics, dialogue and negotiations. We expect the EU to keep its promises not to discriminate against us, or at least not to become a tool to open enmities targeting our country, unquote. He wants Europe to not target his country. The irony could not be stronger here, because it is Erdogan who has been provoking Europe and making targeted attacks against European leaders. I'm sure you are aware of Turkey's expansionism in the eastern Mediterranean region. Turkish vessels have been carrying out drilling activities in the disputed waters claimed by Cyprus and Greece. And the Turkish leader has been insulting European leaders. He once questioned the French president's mental state, saying that Emmanuel Macron needed to be examined. He then accused European leaders of Islamophobia. Erdogan said that Europe was preparing its own end by going back to barbaric times. You have to listen to this.
I
believe that the enemies of Turkey and Islam have gone to drown in a swamp of hatred and animosity in the name of freedom. These are signs that Europe has gone back to barbaric times. Will we renounce our honor for them? Will we look the other way because of them? Some might be able to do that, but the Turkish people cannot take an immoral approach in the face of any attack on their faith and values.
It's been less than a month since this statement was made, and Erdogan is now asking European leaders to take Turkey along. Just what explains this U-turn? A host of things. One, the fear of sanctions. We have been reporting on how EU parliamentarians have been pushing for sanctions against Turkey. Erdogan cannot afford to let that happen. The Turkish economy is in doldrums. The Turkish lira is sinking. Turkey depends heavily on Europe for trade. The European Union is Turkey's largest import and export partner. Turkey just cannot afford to get sanctioned. 2. EU membership. Remember, Turkey is still just a candidate waiting to become an EU member. There is an EU summit taking place just next month, December 10th to be precise. Turkey's inclusion as a member will be up for discussion during this summit. And going by Erdogan's recent provocations against some European countries, a full-fledged membership seems to be a distant dream for Turkey. Hence, this shift in narrative. The third reason, financial assistance, of course. Remember, Turkey receives payments from the EU budget as pre-accession support, meaning support before it officially becomes an EU member. Currently, $4.5 billion have been allocated to Turkey for the 2014 to 2020 period. $4.5 billion, that's not a small amount. The money goes to projects in the energy, education and agricultural sectors. But this aid is set to go if EU moves ahead with its sanctions against Turkey. And the last reason, the pandemic. Every country needs a vaccine. So does Turkey. Securing an EU membership means smooth access to vaccines. Last we checked, the European Union had struck a deal to pay less for the Pfizer vaccine. Turkey does not want to be left out. So the Turkish president attended the recently concluded virtual G20 summit to deliver a message of peace and cooperation. With European leaders listening, Erdogan said this pandemic had increased the responsibility and importance of the G20. I'll leave you with this.
I believe that the coronavirus pandemic has increased the responsibility and importance of the G20, which brings together the largest economies of the world under the same roof. The decisions to be taken at the Riyadh summit will be instrumental in not only alleviating the negative impacts of the pandemic, but also in meeting the expectations from G20.
Our next story is about a meeting that has been making headlines all throughout the day, but whether the meeting even took place has become a subject of intense debate. It all depends on who you ask. Let's tell you what I'm talking about. The Israeli media has been reporting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently flew to Saudi Arabia and held a secret meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince. Yossi Cohen, the head of Israel's intel agency Mossad, is said to have accompanied Netanyahu. The Israeli media says the meeting took place on Sunday and in the presence of U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. A member of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet and officials within the Likud party are said to have confirmed these reports. Netanyahu's office had no immediate comments, but the Israeli media has been stressing on this meeting as a major breakthrough between the two countries. According to Haaretz, Israel's biggest daily, aviation tracking data showed that a private jet had made a brief trip from Tel Aviv to Neom in Saudi Arabia. The newspaper says that flight tracking websites showed that the plane was grounded for approximately 2 hours before it returned to Israel about half an hour past midnight. And this is where things get interesting. Saudi Arabia has categorically denied that this meeting ever took place. Faisal bin Farhan, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, has said, and I'm quoting now, "I have seen press reports about a purported meeting between His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, and Israeli officials during the recent visit by Secretary Pompeo. No such meeting occurred. The only officials present were American and Saudi," unquote. No meeting occurred, says the Saudi foreign minister. What about Benjamin Netanyahu then? What did he have to say about these reports? Well, he has neither denied nor confirmed the meeting. Addressing his party members in Jerusalem, the Israeli leader had this to say.
Mr. Prime Minister, we heard you visited abroad, Saudi Arabia. That's the news we heard.
Are you serious? Friends, throughout my years, I have never commented on such things. And I don't intend to start doing so now. I can only tell you that really, throughout my years as the Prime Minister, I did not save any effort to strengthen the state of Israel and to expand the circle of peace. And thank God, we have managed to do it with our neighbors, with the Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan, and I hope this circle will always expand.
The meeting may or may not have happened, but the growing proximity between Israel and Saudi Arabia cannot be downplayed. Allow me to explain this. In September this year, the UAE and Israel signed a peace deal, and Israeli aircraft flew over to Abu Dhabi as a peace gesture. Saudi Arabia, the giant neighbor of UAE, kept its peace gestures to aviation rights. It allowed the flight to pass over its airspace. This was a historic decision. Up until then, Israeli flights had to avoid Saudi airspace. And then in October, the US president was asked if he expects Riyadh to establish diplomatic ties with the UAE. He promised that Saudi Arabia will do so at the right time. He said the world will see something special very soon. And now we have the Israeli media claiming that Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Saudi Arabia to meet Crown Prince MBS. Saudi Arabia may have denied that the meeting occurred, but Benjamin Netanyahu's silence on this issue is only adding to the mystery. Is Apple tacitly supporting human rights violations in China? A report has come out. It says the tech giant is lobbying against a bill to prevent forced labor in China. This after human rights activists have raised concerns over claims that forced Uyghur labor has been used to make Apple products. Our next report gets you more details.
It was just a few months ago when Apple announced its human rights policy. The tech giant put in place a supplier code of conduct with specific clauses on human rights and trafficking. If one reads through this document, it leaves the impression that Apple cares about human rights, but this report paints a very different picture. It claims that Apple's lobbyists are trying to weaken a bill aimed at preventing forced labor in China. The proposed law is designed to block imports produced by forced labor in Xinjiang, a region where China has carried out the persecution of more than 1 million Muslims. If passed, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act could make Apple's life tougher. It would require US companies to guarantee that they do not use imprisoned or coerced workers. Apple has repeatedly faced heat over its production facilities in China. The latest allegation came in March when a think tank published this report. It found 4 instances of forced labor being used in Apple's supply chain. The report says that in 2017, Chinese government transferred 1,000 to 2,000 Uyghurs in a factory owned by O-Film, a company that makes selfie cameras for the Apple iPhone. Apple is not the only company to face such an accusation. The same report claims that 82 foreign and Chinese companies have tainted supply chains. This included names like Amazon, Dell, General Motors, Nike, Nintendo, Uniqlo, Victoria's Secret, and Zara. Amazon acknowledged the report and denounced forced labor in a statement. General Motors investigated the allegations and ended its relationship with the supplier in question. Apple too has faced the heat to do more. Last year, an NGO called China Labor Watch published a report. It claimed that there were a string of labor rights violations at a Foxconn factory in Jiangsu. Foxconn is one of the main suppliers of Apple. It was accused of withholding bonus payments, rolling back safety training, and employing more temporary workers than what China's laws allow. Apple denied most of the allegations, but accepted that it did exceed the limits on contract workers. Apple CEO Tim Cook had once said, "Businesses should step up and lead on human rights." It's time for Apple to walk the talk. Viewer Report, We On. World is One.
Time time now for our Gravitas vaccine tracker. There is a lot of buzz around the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The efficacy results were announced today. In India, it is being called Covishield, and experts say this vaccine could be a crucial milestone in the fight against the Wuhan virus. There are a lot of questions that emerge now. Who has developed this vaccine? How does it work? How effective is it? How much does it cost? And when can you and I access it? We try and answer these questions in the next 5 minutes. Starting with the vaccine. Who has developed it? AstraZeneca, a Swedish-British multinational pharmaceutical company. They have developed the vaccine along with the University of Oxford. The work is said to have started months ago. The Jenner Institute at the University of Oxford have reportedly been working on it ever since the 2014 Ebola outbreak. The researchers feared another epidemic was only waiting to happen. In January 2020, the first cases of the disease were reported, and by April, the scientists knew what they were dealing with and what needed to be done here. Listen to this.
And because we started in April, we've been following people after vaccination for a very long period of time. And with so many people, it's difficult to think of a good way of expressing this, or the amount of follow-up there's been. But if you just add all of those months together of follow-up that we have, we're now at about 6,000 years of follow-up, if you were to include all of the people. So it's a huge amount of data.
On to the second question here. How does the vaccine work? To answer this, let me begin from the manufacturing process. Scientists working on the vaccine took genes from the spike protein on the surface of the coronavirus. They then put these genes into a harmless, weakened version of a common virus, which causes cold in chimpanzees. The same technology was used to produce vaccines for Zika and MERS. The virus is genetically modified, so it does not grow once inside the body. How exactly does the vaccine kill the virus then? The vaccine enters cells which then start to produce the coronavirus spike protein. This induces an immune response. It prompts the immune system to produce antibodies and activate killer T cells to destroy the infected cells. If the patient catches the virus again, the antibodies and T cells are triggered to fight the virus. Here's the advantage for low and middle income countries now. Unlike the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the Oxford vaccine shot can be kept at refrigerator temperatures.
First of all, it's a vaccine that can be stored at fridge temperature for longer periods. It's a vaccine that has high effectiveness in one of the dosage regimes that have been tried out. 50,000 volunteers, I was just checking my notes, have been involved in developing it. And according to the reports we've seen, there aren't major safety challenges.
Now, the effectiveness of the vaccine depends on the doses, the question of how effective will the vaccine be. One regimen proved it to be 90% effective in preventing COVID-19 when administered as a half dose. Another regimen showed 62% efficacy when given as 2 full doses. The combined analysis from both the dosings or both the dosing regimens resulted in an average efficacy of 70%.
Intriguingly, it has an overall efficacy in our trials of 70%. But when we look into the data a bit further, in the 2 different dosing regimes we used, one of the dosing regimes has 90% efficacy and the other one has 62% efficacy. And the higher efficacy regime is better tolerated, and also there's a hint that it may have an impact on asymptomatic infection and therefore possibly transmission of the virus.
Question number 4, how much does the vaccine cost? AstraZeneca has made a no-profit pledge. It plans on selling the vaccine to governments at a price of around 3 to 4 euros, that is close to 260 Indian rupees. The Pune-based Serum Institute of India is expected to get the emergency approval to sell the vaccine. The CEO of Serum Institute, Mr. Adar Poonawalla, says the company might sell a 2-shot vaccine for around 500 to 600 rupees for the general public. This is based on reports. There is no final word on the price of the vaccine. The next question, when can you access the vaccine? The CEO of AstraZeneca, Pascal Soriot, says that large-scale vaccination could happen by the end of this year, but it all depends on whether full trial results support the optimism from the early findings and if the developers can satisfy global regulators. So when exactly can India expect the vaccine then? Reports say that India might get its first lot of this vaccine by the end of January and early February next year. That is barely 2 months from now. The Serum Institute of India has said that it will focus on supplying the vaccine to Indians before distributing it in other countries. We will be tracking these developments very closely. And while we are busy tracking the vaccine updates, here's one thing we cannot forget. The threat from the Wuhan virus is far from over. Our next report gives you 2 reasons why we absolutely cannot afford to let our guards down. First, the virus may be spreading from sectors where we least imagined. And second, there are people who may be trying to deliberately contaminate you. Take a look.
There are no cars in the parking zone of the Shanghai Pudong International Airport. Only a growing line of people in PPE kits waiting for their turn to be tested for the Wuhan virus. These are all airport workers. Over the weekend, Shanghai's biggest international airport was caught in chaos. At least 7 cargo handlers were linked to a COVID outbreak in the city. So in order to contain the cluster, authorities asked all cargo staff to take Wuhan virus tests. But no provisions were made for social distancing. The result looked something like this. And it did not go unnoticed by social media. An admission from the Shanghai authorities made matters worse.
None of them wore masks when they were doing the cleaning work.
At least 17,719 samples were collected as of November 23rd. Of them, 11,544 samples were tested. The results were all negative. Aviation data provider VeriFlight claimed that at least 40% of flights from Shanghai were cancelled. The Shanghai episode has cast a shadow over the already ravaged aviation industry. Here's what else will now be viewed with added caution. Letters. Interpol has warned that world leaders could become targets of COVID-contaminated letters. On the 17th of November, Interpol issued the latest guidelines for law enforcement. The police organization flagged 3 risks. First, of individuals spitting and coughing in the faces of law enforcement officers, health practitioners and essential workers in order to intimidate them. Second, attempts to deliberately contaminate surfaces and objects. And third, contaminated letters targeting political figures. Interpol added that infected individuals may deliberately move from affected areas to non-affected areas. With individuals trying to take advantage of a health crisis, deliberate contamination is the latest threat. There is a greater need now to stay alert, to stay safe. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It has been 20 days since the US presidential election and over 2 weeks since Joe Biden was declared the president-elect. But US President Donald Trump is still not ready to concede. Some say he may not concede till Biden's inauguration day, that is the 20th of January 2021. What happens to the online transition? What happens to the White House social media accounts if Trump does not accept defeat? Will Trump's team retain control of the POTUS handle? Can Melania Trump's office refuse to transfer the handle of the floaters? Our next report gets you the answers.
US President Donald Trump's Twitter handle is one of the most crucial organs of his administration. Over the last 4 years, this page, at Real Donald Trump, replaced the White House press office on way too many occasions. Important policy announcements were made here. Officials were fired on Twitter. The president's handle was also at the center of numerous conspiracy theories and pushed forward lies and fake news, including this one, where Donald Trump claimed he won the 2020 presidential race. Twitter has flagged multiple Trump tweets during election season with a label announcing that Trump's election fraud claims are disputed, or multiple sources call the elections differently. But none of these claims could be taken down because Trump's handle enjoys special privileges and his tweets are immune to takedowns. But come 20th of January, Trump will no longer be a government official, and his Twitter handle will lose all the special privileges, meaning he could be banned for spreading misinformation. Trump's tweets will not just be flagged, but taken off the platform. Twitter will bring Trump's handle at par with that of any other user. While Trump may be blocking Joe Biden's transition process, social media platforms are preparing for a White House transition. So come 20th of January 2021, Twitter will transfer the presidential house accounts to America's president-elect, Joe Biden. The Trump administration will lose control of the handles for the White House, the POTUS and the FLOTUS. The social media platform said it is actively preparing to support the transition of White House institutional accounts. And Twitter is not alone. Facebook too is preparing for account transitions, as is Instagram. And all of these accounts will be transferred to Joe Biden's team, irrespective of whether Trump decides to concede or decides against it. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Remember the viral ALS Ice Bucket Challenge? It was a rage online. One of the co-founders, Pat Quinn, has now passed away at the age of 37. Quinn himself was diagnosed with ALS in 2013 and was battling the disease since then. Take a look.
In 2014, people around the globe were pouring ice water over their heads. The Ice Bucket Challenge, which went viral on social media, was designed to raise awareness for ALS, condition in which parts of the nervous system become damaged, causing progressive muscle weakness. Quinn was 30 when he was diagnosed with ALS in March 2013. Following his diagnosis, he established a group of supporters, Quinn for the Win, to raise awareness and funds for the fight against the disease. Quinn then helped create the Ice Bucket Challenge, a multi-million-dollar movement to help find a cure for ALS. To participate in the challenge, people dumped a bucket of ice-cold water over their heads and then challenged a friend to either do the same or donate money to the ALS Association. The challenge drew high-profile participants, including President Donald Trump, former President George W. Bush, Oprah Winfrey, Lady Gaga, Bill Gates, LeBron James, and the list goes on. With 17 million people participating, the viral challenge helped raise over $220 million in donations for ALS research. While Quinn did not start the challenge, the 37-year-old has often been credited with helping popularize what is now known as the greatest social media campaign in history. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
Друзья, это невероятная энергия, это невероятная мощь. Разбегается Дмитрий. Вот это будет чувство.